At 75, a cultural critic's words reverberate like a thunderclap in the quiet sanctum of Bob Dylan's untouchable legacy. Long celebrated as the voice of his generation, Dylan is now cast in a stark, unflattering light. Accusations of plagiarism and deception are nothing new to the legendary songwriter, but recent claims add a darker hue to the portrait of a man whose words once defined rebellion and freedom. Think of this: a folk hero revered for his lyrical genius, now accused of being a cunning recycler of other people's work. The allegations have rekindled an old debate, and with new examples surfacing, they strike at the very core of Dylan's authenticity. Back in 2010, Joni Mitchell, one of the most respected voices of her generation, shattered the unspoken reverence surrounding Bob Dylan. With the blunt force of her words, she called him out as a plagiarist and a fake. It was a statement that hit like a thunderclap, a grenade hurled into a room packed with Dylan loyalists. The music world froze, stunned by the audacity of one genius to call another an imposter. And yet the shockwaves quickly dissipated. Critics and fans alike brushed off Mitchell's comments, framing them as the bitter rant of a rival. Think of this: Mitchell, the woman who wrote some of the most introspective and honest music of the 20th century, warned us that Dylan's celebrated authenticity was nothing more than an elaborate illusion. But her voice was drowned out in the cacophony of adoration for a man seen as untouchable. At the time, her words were dismissed, an inconvenient truth too uncomfortable to confront. Now, with mounting evidence, Mitchell's comments take on an eerie prescience, like the warning of a prophet no one wanted to believe. Mitchell's critique went deeper than lyrics. She didn't just accuse Dylan of borrowing melodies or lifting phrases; she claimed his entire identity was built on borrowed pieces. "He's not authentic at all," she declared, suggesting that even his enigmatic mystique, the very thing that made him an icon, was stitched together from the personas of others. Picture this: the man who sold us an image of a wandering troubadour, the ultimate individualist, secretly piecing together his identity like a collage from the scraps of other artists' lives. Mitchell's accusation wasn't just about plagiarism, it was about deception on a much larger scale. To her, Dylan wasn't just borrowing tunes, he was borrowing the very essence of what made him legendary. She described his mystique as a construct, a carefully curated facade designed to dazzle audiences and conceal the patchwork of borrowed ideas underneath. And yet, the world turned a blind eye. How could a man who spoke so eloquently about truth and freedom possibly be a fraud? It was a question no one wanted to ask. Mitchell's accusations landed with the force of a betrayal, but they also carried a note of inevitability. She spoke of Dylan with the frustration of someone who had seen the truth long before others dared to. To her, his rise was not a story of unfiltered genius but a tale of strategic manipulation, a calculated ascension built on the uncredited work of others. Think of her words as a warning: the cracks in Dylan's pedestal were always there, invisible to those too entranced to look closely. Mitchell saw what the rest of us refused to: an artist whose brilliance was not entirely his own. And yet her warnings went unheeded. The cultural machine continued to elevate Dylan to near mythic status, turning a blind eye to the mounting evidence. The irony is bitter. Mitchell, a woman celebrated for her ability to see and articulate emotional truths, found her own truths dismissed when they threatened the legacy of a man the world wasn't ready to question. Today, Mitchell's words are more than a critique, they're a challenge to everything we thought we knew about Bob Dylan. The very idea of him as a lone genius, a singular voice crying out against the establishment, is now under scrutiny. Was he a prophet, or just a plagiarist with impeccable timing? Joni Mitchell, often overshadowed by Dylan in conversations about 20th century songwriting, has emerged as a crucial voice in this reckoning. Her critique forces us to confront uncomfortable questions: how much of Dylan's legacy is truly his? How many others, forgotten or ignored, contributed to the empire he built? It's a dramatic turn of events, one that paints Mitchell not as a bitter rival but as a Cassandra, a truth-teller cursed to be ignored until it's too late. As the cracks in Dylan's reputation grow deeper, her words echo louder, demanding attention. In the court of public opinion, it seems the case against Dylan is far from closed, and Mitchell, at last, is being heard. One of Dylan's more glaring controversies surrounds his 2006 song Rollin' and Tumblin' from Modern Times. The track's melody is nearly identical to a 1929 blues tune by Hambone Willie Newburn. The similarity is undeniable, and the only difference seems to be the omission of credit to the original creator. This isn't an isolated case. Albums like Love and Theft, ironically named, contain lyrics and themes eerily similar to obscure literary works, such as those by Japanese author Junichi Saga. Dylan has brushed off these accusations as homage, but critics argue it's theft disguised under the cloak of admiration. The anthem that defined a generation, Blowin In The Wind, has its roots in the African-American spiritual No More Auction Block. The melody is hauntingly similar, yet Dylan's name appears as the sole creator. Critics point out the bitter irony: a song that championed equality and freedom may owe its success to an uncredited cultural heritage. It's a poignant example of how Dylan's greatest works often draw from sources whose contributions go unnoticed, raising questions about integrity in the art of songwriting. Early in his career, Dylan recorded House of the Rising Sun for his 1962 debut album. The song is a traditional folk tune, but Dylan's version bears a striking resemblance to Dave Van Ronk's arrangement. Van Ronk, a contemporary of Dylan in the Greenwich Village folk scene, later revealed his surprise and frustration when he learned Dylan had recorded the song without consulting him. This was no accident. Van Ronk had been performing his version for years, and Dylan, by including it on his album, effectively took ownership of the arrangement. For a young artist just starting out, it was a calculated move, but one that left Van Ronk feeling betrayed. The bittersweet breakup song It Ain't Me, Babe, is widely regarded as one of Dylan's most poignant works. But some have pointed out its similarities to the themes and tone of Italian poet Cesare Pavese. Pavese's works explore rejection, solitude, and emotional detachment, concepts mirrored in Dylan's lyrics. While it's not unusual for songwriters to draw inspiration from poetry, Dylan's critics argue that his use of such material often blurs the line between influence and appropriation. The fact that no acknowledgement was given only deepens the controversy. The accusations against Dylan extend beyond his songs. His personal life has been marked by betrayal and opportunism, critics allege. Joan Baez, the folk icon who championed Dylan's career in its early days, was cast aside when her influence was no longer needed. Even Dylan's celebrated album Blood on the Tracks has come under scrutiny. Critics argue that songs like Tangled Up in Blue borrow narrative elements from the works of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Anton Chekhov. While Dylan has admitted to drawing inspiration from literature, the line between homage and plagiarism is once again called into question. When Bob Dylan was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016, it was seen as a revolutionary moment for music. For his fans, it was long overdue recognition of his lyrical genius. For critics, it was a stunning affront to traditional literary icons, especially when accusations surfaced that Dylan had borrowed passages from Herman Melville's Moby Dick in his acceptance speech without proper attribution. Think of this: a man celebrated for originality accepting the world's most prestigious literary honor only to be accused of plagiarism in the same breath. For many, it was proof of the very allegations that had haunted Dylan for decades, a career rooted in appropriation, disguised as artistry. Dylan's reaction to the honor only deepened the controversy. For weeks, he ignored the Nobel Committee's attempts to contact him, leaving the world to wonder if his silence was an act of defiance or simple apathy. When he finally acknowledged the award, his response was cool and distant, calling it amazing yet hard to believe. Critics saw this as another insult, a casual dismissal of a prize meant to cement his legacy. Was he too humble to care or too arrogant to bother? When Dylan skipped the Nobel ceremony, he sent Patti Smith to perform in his place. During her rendition of A Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall, she stumbled, forgetting the lyrics mid-song. While her vulnerability moved some, others saw the moment as emblematic of the entire controversy: a borrowed performer faltering in a borrowed moment. For his defenders, the Nobel controversy was overblown, a misunderstanding of Dylan's artistic style. They argue that his genius lies in weaving influences into something greater. For his detractors, it was the culmination of a career built on appropriation. The prize, meant to crown his legacy, instead reignited debates about his authenticity. How can a man accused of plagiarism be celebrated for originality? For his critics, it wasn't just irony, it was poetic justice. The Nobel Prize, once a crowning achievement, now stands as a symbol of the contradictions that have always defined Bob Dylan, a man lauded as a genius, yet shadowed by accusations of theft. For fans, these revelations are not just disappointing, they're devastating. Dylan's songs were more than music, they were anthems for a generation seeking truth in a chaotic world. To learn that some of those truths may have been borrowed or outright stolen is a betrayal that cuts deep. Picture this, the voice of a generation, now silenced by accusations that cast a long shadow over his legacy. The man who once stood as a beacon of authenticity is now seen by some as the ultimate fraud. For Dylan's defenders, his genius lies in his ability to synthesize influences into something greater than the sum of its parts. For his critics, it's a career built on deception. Whichever side you choose, one thing is clear: Bob Dylan's legacy, once untouchable, now stands on shaky ground. The reckoning has begun, and it's a storm that shows no sign of passing.